Alright guys, I've got a video in two parts for you today. Today's the first part and we've got part 2 on Saturday, a week from today. And the theme of this video is Fougere fragrances, barbershop fragrances, aromatic fougere barbershop fragrances, all the way up to the 90s, the end of the 90s. And then next week's are more modern fougere fragrances that are on the market today. I wanted to make sure the fragrances that I'm speaking about today are all still selling. And this is a ranked list of my favorite classic fougere fragrances. Find out what they are coming right up. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Sebastian, talking to you about fougere fragrances. Let me know if you're a fan of this style. Let me know if you like the classics. Let me know if you like the more modern ones. We have some dating back to the 50s and 30s here, and they're still around today, selling, and they still smell great. I've ranked this list in favorites, plus also what condition the reformulations are in. So the ones at the bottom are least favorite, or they don't smell as good. So let's get started with the list. We're talking about the first one here from the house of Calvin Klein. This is Eternity for Men. So unfortunately, this has been butchered to death, unlike Obsession for Men, which still smells pretty good today. This has gotten light, weak, and distant relative to what the original used to smell like. I wore it in the early 90s, 1990. I think it was 89, 90, 91 is when I was wearing Calvin Klein Eternity for Men. It was a fougere, but very modernized for that time. Nothing like Drakkar Noir, which is another fragrance I wore a lot of. And it had, the aromatic touches and the spices, but there was a bit of a watery effect happening. It was after Cool Water had launched. That's also a fougere. And so it was kind of like capitalizing on that more airy, light, watery kind of fougere style. It's a great fragrance, or used to be I should say, but it's unfortunately ranked here at the bottom because it's not as good as it used to be. And if you're a fan of Calvin Klein, I think if you like their fragrances, check out Obsession for Men. I think that still smells pretty good today, but let's quickly smell this because also I remember this not having such a metallic effect, but when I smell it with the current formulation, it comes off very metallic. But you have the herbs, you have the spices, you have the mossy touches, earthy touches, and woods. And then of course there's this kind of a watery thing happening under there. So that's Eternity from 1988. Then going to the house of DUNHILL, ALFRED DUNHILL, it's DUNHILL edition. This one is from 1984. You're going to notice that a lot of the fougères are from the 80s, but we've got some from the 70s. Of course, I mentioned 30s and 50s, and then also there's fougères from the 90s here as well. But this is a fragrance created by Alain Astori. It's fir, nutmeg, vetiver, oakmoss, and clary sage. I don't see much of DUNHILL's fragrances lately. You know, they launched those more exclusive type fragrances probably towards the end of the 2010s. And the sandalwood in that collection was great, but I don't see them getting very hyped lately with any fragrance launches. But this is still pretty good, but still watered down. But it has that kind of a very fougere-like smell with that kind of piney fir, kind of a spiciness that's typically found in the fougere style fragrances. This came out 2 years after Drakkar Noir, and I wore, like I said, Drakkar Noir a lot. I did not wear DUNHILL edition myself in the 80s, but I've come to enjoy it. It's on the light side, but definitely spicy. It has a very spicy edge, and it's got that nutmeg pretty prominent, so it's giving you a bit of a warm effect, but it's nothing like cloves or cinnamon, which will turn the fragrance into like a holiday spice vibe. There's a bit of a warmth there from that nutmeg, but it's a nice balance with all the woodiness and the mossiness and the aromatic touches. So that is DUNHILL edition from 1984. Then going to the house of HOUBIGANT. This is Duc de Verveine in the Eau de Toilette concentration. Sadly, I don't have the Eau de Parfum, or the Intense or Extreme as it used to be called. I like the Eau de Toilette, but it does remind me a lot of Drakkar Noir, so it is ranked here lower. And also, just to take note, HOUBIGANT's Fougère Royale is probably one of the best fougères, but I would consider that a modern fougere because it was redone in 2010. But here, this is more of an old school 80s powerhouse style fougere with oak moss. There's lavender here, there's rosemary, there's sage, there's bergamot. So it's fresh, mossy, herbal, aromatic, and that old school kind of Drakkar Noir-like fougere experience. I need to get the Eau de Parfum just to see how much better it is. But this one reminds me of that style of Drakkar Noir, but very light. So that's HOUBIGANT's Duc de Verveine from 1985. Then going to the House of Aramis, this is New West. So I made sure all the fragrances are selling. There are still bottles of this out there at the discounters. It's around $40, $50. And I wore this one and really enjoyed it back in the late 80s and early 90s. And once again, I think it was capitalizing on the fresh and kind of watery, ozonic take on fougere after Cool Water came out. Although I think this came out the same year as Cool Water, which is here in this list as well. This is created by Harry Fremont and Annie Bouzantian. It's bay, bergamot, oak moss, oregano, rosemary, clary sage, ozonic notes. I was around 17 years old when this launched. My dad was a big fan of the Aramis fragrances. He probably wore every single one of them. I can't remember if he wore this one or not, but I got into fragrances really early on, and this, I really loved the original bottle. It was a blue bottle, but it had a really kind of 80s effect on the label. This is not the effect that I'm talking about, but really took me into a very fun and playful direction with the name and actually the way the fragrance wears as well. There's a slight fruitiness in here, and it's a lot of aromatics and spices. And when you're talking about aromatics, a lot of herbal notes and spicy, you know, kind of green. All of this stuff comes to mind. But there is a fresh edge about this one. It's got the ozonic notes. So ozonic notes are kind of like violet leaves, cucumbers, and things like that. Amazing fragrance, I think, at one time. It still smells pretty good today. That's why it's ranked here at number 18. But let's move on to a fragrance from the 90s that I wore a ton of, around 94, 95, 96. And when I wore it at that time, it was potent as hell. And I used to overspray it, and I think some people used to be like, damn, that smells too strong. Cut your sprays down a little. This is Dolce & Gabbana's Pour Homme. This version is from 2010. They reformulated it, but originally it was launched in the 90s, and it's created by Max Gavarry. So this is lavender, neroli, clary, tarragon, tobacco, cardamom, and coumarin. So whatever they did to this fragrance, they have neutered it quite a bit. It's not like what I remember it. When I used to wear it, there was a sweetness about it, and I think it was the tonka or the coumarin in here. It was really, really intense. So it added a sweeter, kind of more of an ambery base to all the aromatics, herbs, and freshness that was there. And I think because of this, it was extremely sweet. And I sometimes would think to myself, it's so sweet. But this version, I don't get that sweetness much anymore. It's more about the herbs and woods. What do you guys think? Do you know the comparison between the original Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme with the new version? I mean, you get the smell of the original in here, but it's so faint. It's lightened up. It's almost like you got regular Coke and Diet Coke. So it's not as oomphy as the original, but I think as a reminder of what it used to smell like, it's there. And man, I wore so much of that fragrance. It was one of my favorites for a long time because I liked its intensity. It was uber strong. All right, so up next, going to the house of Davidoff. It's Cool Water, this one right here. So this was the beginnings of the aquatic movement, and it was a aromatic fougere once again, but with a kind of a watery, ozonic edge. Created in 1988 by Pierre Bourdon, features notes of lavender, peppermint, orange blossom, oak moss, geranium, and rosemary. So all of the notes you experience, all the herbs, the aromatics, the spiciness, the floral notes, the mossy notes are there, but they're run through water, so they don't come off heavy and dense. There's an airy, light, watery effect happening here. And of course, as I said, it was the start of the aquatic more aquatic here, not marine, but it was the start of that kind of a genre where things were becoming different, not your old school kind of very in-your-face herbs and spices kind of fougères, but this was more modern. Obviously right now it's a bit dated because it is from the late 80s, but when you compare this to something like Drakkar Noir from the early 80s, this was a lot more modern. You can smell the herbs, you can smell the aromatics, but you've got that kind of freshness about it, and it makes the fragrance much lighter. Moving on to a fragrance from the 70s, from the early 70s, 1973, it's PACO Rabanne's Pour Homme, this one right here. Are you guys familiar with this one? This one I never wore when I was younger, but I know my dad wore this, and I remember as a kid he had it in the 70s, and he smelled great wearing it. It's a old school style fougère that is from that Spanish house PACO Rabanne, which is now called Rabanne, and it utilized a lot of herbs and aromatics like geranium and lavender were really super strong with citruses, mossy notes. There's also tobacco here, there's ambery notes in the dry down, tonka and lemons, and so it's a great combination. It's green, it's herbal, it's aromatic, it's spicy, it's fresh, not necessarily very warm, but there is the warmth when it's drying down. But definitely one of the best fragrances ever created for men, I think. Very, you know, reliant on the herbs and aromatics as a, you know, key ingredients in the fragrance. This is created by Jean Martel. You definitely notice the herbs. It almost smells a bit like a pine forest as well, because the way the notes are combined together. The geranium and the lavender giving you that kind of a camphoric vibe a little bit. Quite nice, but once again, it's a bit lightened up and not as potent as it used to be, but definitely something you should check out if you're looking for a classic fougère or aromatic fougère barbershop fragrance. But moving on to the house of AZZARO, this is Pour Homme. AZZARO Pour Homme is a great fragrance, and I think even though it's been watered down quite a bit, I like to buy it and leave it, and it does do that aging, maturation, maceration thing. You know, it just kind of gets more intense and more depth to it. So when you wear it, it doesn't act as thin as when you just take it off the shelf, brand new bottle, and it's very thin and disappears kind of a thing. What I like about this aromatic fougère is that they have anise in it, and that gives it a bit of a, you know, like a little bit of light boozy spiciness, which I quite like the anise note, and it made it for a different take, a unique take on an aromatic fougère. Launched in '78 during the height of the disco era. It created by Gerard Anthony. It's lavender, anise, geranium, ambergris, patchouli, amber, basil, bergamot. Really wonderful fragrance. This is very light. If you can still find the EDP or Parfum edition that came out, fantastic fragrance. They took it into a boozy direction. That is an amazing, awesome fragrance if you can find that one. But if you want the original, this is it. You can totally get the old school vibes. It is very lightened up, unfortunately, but you have a lot of that lavender and geranium, and that anise note comes in, gives it a slight spicy green boozy edge to the fragrance. Really wonderful creation. I think that's definitely one of the best fougères that's ever created. Then we're moving on to a 90s fragrance. Once again, this is Estee Lauder's Pleasures for Men. Definitely very modern take on an aromatic fougère created by Pierre Wargnaye from 1997 along with Carlos Benaim and Jean-Claude Delville. What I like about this one, it's got a fruitiness, and I think they're utilizing that fruitiness to give it the more of a modern take on a fougère, capitalizing on the whole modern style that was started with the cool water. And this is a different take on it, fruitier with a nectarine note, so it wears really nice. Definitely much easier to wear, not as old school as some of the fragrances from the 80s, 70s, and prior to that. But a really great fragrance if you haven't tried this, and today it still smells pretty good. I think this is also a great summer fragrance. It features nectarines, allspice, mossy notes, citruses, coriander, and ozonic notes. So it's ozonic, it's watery, it's fresh, herbal, aromatic, and fruity. The nectarines are so unique in this, it almost smells like the peels of the nectarines, like when you bite into the skin of the nectarines, there's that taste, a bit bitterness. You get that here with this. It's a really great fragrance, and to me it smells really great when it's warm outside. It's a fresh, fun, aromatic, fruity fragrance. Pleasures by Estee Lauder. If you haven't tried it, please do. Alright, up next, going to the house of Ted Lapidus. This is Lapidus Pour Homme. Let me know if you're familiar with it. I did not tell you at the beginning of the video, a lot of these are going to be very inexpensive. Like this one's probably around $20-25 for 100 ml. This launched in '87. I would call this more of an amber fougere created by Martin Gras, and it's lavender, incense, olibanum, patchouli, amber, coriander, sandalwood. There's definitely a honeyed and fruity effect happening in this as well. And to this day, it still smells great. It's a bit old school. It's a slightly bit animalic, but a wonderful fragrance that was great when it launched in the late 80s. I like the addition of the kind of honeyed fruitiness that the amber is creating here, giving it a warm edge rather than making it all fresh. Light, smoky, incensey touches comes in as well. But, you know, you've got the patchouli and coriander. Coriander is a note that I really like, and I feel like it's slowly making a comeback. We'll see if it'll really take off. But I really love the smell of the coriander seeds rather than the leaves. The leaves themselves I don't like the smell of, but the seeds are so amazing smelling. So that is Lapidus Pour Homme from 1987. Next, moving on to Floris's number 89 from 1951. This is a total of old school fragrance from a British house, and it's a fougere in a classic style. Once again, you got a lot of aromatic notes in here. Geranium and lavender are key here, along with neroli, sandalwood, iris, rose, ylang ylang, bergamot, cedar, and musk. So there's a lot of floral notes in here, but it's totally old school and masculine, you know, styling. It doesn't come off feminine whatsoever here if you're turned off by floral notes of any kind. In your fragrances, you do have to have floral notes in fragrances, and I do enjoy them in aromatic fougere fragrances. They balance the fragrance out quite a bit, so it makes for a really pleasant wear. This might come off old school, as I was saying, all of these might. But if you appreciate fragrances at all, you're going to enjoy these fragrances. This one is so classic, I love that about it. And it has a very British smell to it, almost a bit like Spanish old school fragrances, but more, I don't know if there's such a thing as similarities between the two countries and their classic men's fragrances, but here I get a bit of a Spanish vibe with this fragrance, even though it's totally British. But a really great, woody, spicy, not a lot of warmth. It's all fresh with aromatics and woods, and, you know, of course, the floral notes that comes in as well. And then moving on to the House of Dior, it's Jules. This is the redo from the 2010s, but initially launched in 1980, created by Jean Martel. This to me is slightly animalic. It's cedar, galbanum, pepper, clary, sage, sandalwood, leather, patchouli, cloves, and resins. And I feel like the leather gives you or contributes to the animalic qualities. But it's super green and bitter, and we get that from the galbanum note. Really wonderful note here. Absolutely love it. It's a plant that they make a resin out of. It's sticky, green, resinous, and bitter. Quite bitter. I love that smell. It's kind of an addicting green smell. It's very, very prominent here with all the woods and citrusy touches. Of course, there's aromatics and spices in this as well. If you haven't tried Jules, do try it. I really do enjoy this one. The original obviously was much better, but here at least a major designer with a major conglomerate has relaunched a classic men's fragrance here. When you smell this one, as I was saying, there's some slight funk in here. We're getting that from the leather for sure. Maybe there's a bit of a reminder of Aramis by Aramis, but this is a bit more potent, whereas Aramis by Aramis has been watered down. Really wonderful offering if you don't know Jules from the House of Dior. And then moving on to the House of Lauder. Estee Lauder, it's Lauder for men with the most gorgeous bottle. Absolutely love. This is one of my favorite bottles of all time. Absolutely love the whatever you call this, the ridging or gradient type situation here. You have that in the cap as well. And the smell itself is really great. It was recently relaunched, I believe, by Estee Lauder, and they've kept it in a great condition. Originally launched in '85, it's created by Nicolas Calderon. It has aromatic notes, lemons, oakmoss, geranium, bergamot, amber, green notes, and jasmine. This one also reminds me of Aramis by Aramis, but that one also has leather. This one doesn't have much of a leathery presence, if at all. It's all very green, aromatic, spicy, herbal, woody, mossy, amazing fragrance by Estee Lauder, I think. I'm glad they have this in the collection. I love the old school qualities of this, and just takes me back to the 80s when this launched. I remember all the ads for these fragrances. I've always been a very visual person, and I remember the ads for, there was a famous 80s actor that was the spokesmodel for this one. But Lauder for Men, really, really great. It is lighter now, much lighter, but you have that old school barbershop vibe here. Spices, herbs, aromatics, woods and mossy notes and things like that. Really great with light flowers thrown in there, so there's a little bit of a light traces of floral notes coming in to once again balance out the fragrance. So this next fragrance is from the house of ALFRED Sung. It's Sung Homme. The only thing I have to be honest about, I haven't bought a recent bottle. This bottle is from around 12 years ago, and this bottle at that time, oh my God, it was kept in a perfect condition. So if anybody has any info on the recent batches, do let me know, add a comment below. If it's still robust and intense, like it used to be 10, 12 years ago, this is definitely one of the best fougères that were ever made. A lot of people say Irish Spring soap. I don't know if I really get that. There's a bit of a green reminder of it, but I wouldn't call it like smelling like Irish Spring soap to me. Created by James Bell from 1988, it's thyme, patchouli, petitgrain, geranium, lavender, clary, sage, laurels, and pine. Wonderful fragrance. It doesn't smell purple at all. I don't know why it's purple. It's all green and aromatic and spicy for me, and one of the best fougère fragrances. I wore this in the very late 80s into the 90s, and I couldn't get enough of it, and it was super potent at the time. And when I bought this one, it was also potent. Not as potent as when I was wearing it, but it was kept pretty good, in a pretty good condition with reformulations. Oh man, totally takes me back to the very early 90s, late 80s. It smells so good. So green, so spicy, but also fresh and woody, because a lot of these notes, or these kind of fragrances, had a lot of fresher notes rather than warmer notes, unless you had something like the Ted Lapidus, which had the amber in the base, so it got warmer as it was drying down. But moving on to the house of Loewe, it's Essentia in the Eau de Toilette concentration. I've always mentioned this in the videos. The EDT is the old school. The EDP is more like Aventus. So if you're in the market for Essentia and you don't like Aventus, stay away from the EDP. If you like old school fougères, check out the EDT. It does also come in a different bottle now. This is from 1987, created by Jacques Chabert. Lavender, Tarragon, Geranium, Vetiver, blackcurrant buds, lemons, lily of the valley, Oakmoss, mossy notes, and things like that. There's a bit of leather in this as well. But Tarragon, we don't see that note come up in fragrances much. And this is a who's who of herbs and aromatics. You really pick it up. And it is a wonderful offering. And even though it's a fougère and the Ralph Lauren Polo Green is a chypre, leather chypre, this does have some similarities to that fragrance. But smells really great. I don't know what the current version in the tall bottle, because it's no longer in this bottle, if it still smells as good as this. But this smells fantastic. Old school green and aromatic. I love that. Really wonderful. It's getting really great. The fragrances are really awesome. And this next fragrance from the house of Hugo Boss, it's Boss number 1. This is, I have so many memories of this fragrance, and I've mentioned this in my videos. I used to work as a teenager, late teens, used to work for a dry cleaner as an after school job, and a lot of the businessmen used to bring their white shirts to be laundered. Everybody had this fragrance on, and it got me addicted to this particular fragrance. I got obsessed with it, and I had to wear it in the late 80s. So it's created by Pierre Wergnay, who also created Drakkar Noir. It's launched in 85. It's nutmeg, patchouli, balsamic notes, cardamom, sandalwood, oak moss, mossy notes, spices, woods. All of that stuff comes in with this fragrance. The other thing I should say, this bottle has now been changed as well. I bought this during the pandemic, and I'm really happy with the formulation here. It still has its heft. It smells great. Old school. It has like intensity. It has depth. It's a great fragrance. It is definitely old school though. It does smell really like dated, but I love the kind of smell this is. So I don't know the new bottle if it's still as strong and potent as this, but this does have that warmth a little bit with that nutmeg note. So it warms up the fragrance, but it's mostly a lot of fresh notes. you know, aromatics are all very fresh and not very warm. So it's nicely balanced with a lot of woods and aromatics and herbs and spices with a little bit of that warm coming in. Really wonderful offering if you don't know that one. That's Boss Number 1 from 1985. I think that's their first fragrance. Then going to the 90s, 1996, this is the Dreamer. It used to be just Dreamer, then they redid this fragrance, I think around 2010, and they changed the name to the Dreamer. It definitely has lost its luster, but still smells great as it is. Created by Jean-Pierre Berthoud. This is amber, tarragon, lilies, juniper berries, tobacco blossom, iris, linden blossom, wild flowers. And to me, this was more like an amber fougere style. It had some warmth under there. It created this tobacco blossom, amber, kind of a fusion aromatic fougere. Really unique, really wonderful offering. It is definitely much lighter than the original, but I think the new version is fresher, so you can wear it more liberally, and it's got that signature smell that I really love that reminds me of the late 90s when I had, you know, started living in San Francisco when I moved here for school. I love this fragrance. It takes me back, just like the Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, but the Dreamer to me, it smells a little better than the reformulation of the Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme. 4 more fragrances to go, guys. This next one's from the house of Jean-Paul Gaultier. It's Le Male from 1995, created by Francis Kurkdjian. This was definitely one of the more popular fragrances around that time, you know, as a amber fougere style. Aromatic fougere, amber fougere. It's lavender, tonka, bergamot, mint, vanilla, and neroli. It's interesting that they're still making the fragrances. They're creating flankers. This is a long-standing collection of men's fragrances. And to this day, I think they're keeping the DNA a little bit, but advancing it and taking it into different directions. But a really great fragrance, I think, that was started by Jean-Paul Gaultier and Francis Kurkdjian. I think it's a revolutionary fragrance. It's been around for over 30 years. Well, this is the 30th year actually this year, so they're going to celebrate 30 years of Le Male. And to this day, it still smells pretty darn good. And the vanilla, the warm notes, the aromatics, ambery touches, and spices, all really great creation. It takes me back totally. Really does take me back to when I first put my nose on this. Was like, wow, what is that fragrance I'm smelling? Definitely great. That's Le Male from the house of Jean-Paul Gaultier. Then go into the house of Caron. It's Pour Homme de Caron, and this is from the 30s. 1934, created by Ernest Daldroff. Lavender, vanilla, ambergris, geranium, musk, and lime. Yes, this version has gotten neutered. It's lighter. If you want a stronger version of this, get the Parfum edition that just came out. It's just a more in-your-face take on the original, but the original is still pretty good. I think it still smells great. Lavender, vanilla, ambergris, geranium, musk, and lime, as I said. But a really great creation. It's a warm take on aromatic fougere. So there's the warm ambery notes and vanillic notes in the dry down along with musk. So really, you know, historic fragrance for men. One of the best fragrances ever created. And I think it's one of the very first amber fougeres because it's definitely ambery in the dry down and all spicy, aromatic, and herbal up top. I mean, both Pour Homme de Caron and Le Male are kind of in the same style. So was Le Male inspired by Pour Homme de Caron? Who knows? But both of them are great, and I really love Pour Homme de Caron. It means a lot to me because my dad wore that. The next fragrance at number 2 is Cartier's Pasha de Cartier, the original from 1992. Created by Alain Verjus. It's lavender, coriander, patchouli, mint, thyme, labdanum, mandarin, oakmoss, palisander, and sandalwood. You know, the new version is so good, the more intense Parfum edition that's gone into an amber fougere direction. Here with the original, it's all old school, loads of patchouli and all the aromatics and spices. And they've kept it pretty good. I don't think it's as good as the original. The projection was a lot more intense with the original and a lot more patchouli, and that thing has a lot of projection, but I think this version is pretty darn good. It's just gotten lighter. Smell-wise, it's really great, but definitely very old school. Really love this fragrance. Really, really love it. That's why I've put it here. It's got a lot of spicy aromatics like mint, lavender, all of that stuff gives it a spicy edge along with that earthy patchouli. The projection of this is really great, and I've heard from people that used to wear this in the early 90s and go to clubs. It was the clubbing fragrance in the early 90s for guys to wear and dance and, like, you know, project their fragrance off of themselves. But you know, it's still a great fragrance. I think the original has a little more projection than the Parfum, but very old school and an amazing fragrance. But the #1 fragrance here is Drakkar Noir, my favorite aromatic fougere, classic aromatic fougere. I still love it, but if you think this has gotten light, go with the one that came out about 3 years ago, the Extreme, I believe it's called, in the orange juice. It's definitely stronger, but originally created in 1982, Drakkar Noir is created by Pierre Wargnier. It came after Drakkar, which came out in the 70s, and I think Drakkar, the original, was not as successful as Drakkar Noir. And this is one of the best old school fougere barbershop fragrances with loads of lavender, patchouli, lemons, mint, rosemary, fir balsam, coriander, oak moss. Such a great classic men's fragrance, one of the best fragrances ever created. It's very, very historic, and it's still around today. And I think the reformulations of this is still pretty good. It's just gotten very, very light. And as I said, if you think this is too light, go with the Extreme, the one that came out like 3 years ago during the pandemic, which was its 30th anniversary, 30th or 40th anniversary, I think. Yeah, it was the 40th anniversary of that fragrance in like 2022, I believe, is when it came out. But I love that smell. It's so good. Really, really great. And that is the #1 fragrance here, Drakkar Noir by Guy Laroche. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you today. Those are the aromatic fougere or fougere barbershop fragrances, the classic ones. Let me know what your thoughts are on these fragrances. Is there something missing? Well, I wanted to make sure these are all still selling. That was the main point of this video, because a lot of you complain if I feature fragrances that are not on the market. So you can find these fragrances still. They're all selling. But if there's something else that's out there on the market that I missed, do let me know what it is. Put a comment down below. And stay tuned for the more modern fougere fragrances next Saturday. Otherwise, please like this video. Please share it. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.